She's just a coffee shop owner. He's the most powerful tycoon in Chicago, and the 6-year-old running around the bar. That's the secret neither of them is ready to face. 12 years ago, they fell in love. 12 years later, he walks into her shop with a convoy of sleek black cars and eyes as cold as steel. But what freezes him in place is the silver compass necklace she still wears around her neck, the one he gave her the night he promised to return. Like, comment the city you're viewing to let me know how far this story has come. And watch to the end, because things aren't quite what they seem. The cafe smelled like burned coffee and wet wool. Avery Hale noticed it every morning, that particular combination of scorched grounds and rain-soaked jackets that came through the door around 6 a.m. when the construction crews and the early commuters started filing in. She'd been smelling it for 3 years, long enough that it had stopped bothering her, long enough that it had become, in some stupid way she'd never admit out loud, a smell that felt like hers. She wiped down the counter without looking up. Her hands moved on autopilot, rag left to right, circular at the corners where the espresso rings collected, then a quick pass over the lip of the bar where people rested their elbows and left skin oil and newspaper ink. She'd developed a rhythm. Everything in her life ran on rhythm now. It was the only thing keeping her upright. "Mom," the voice came from behind the pastry case, small, insistent. "Mom, Eli dropped the—" I heard it. She hadn't heard it, but she was already moving toward the sound, already crouching before she rounded the corner to find her son standing in a puddle of orange juice, his sneakers soaking it up, his face caught somewhere between expecting punishment and hoping she'd just laugh. 6 years old and already an expert at reading the room. She looked at him. He looked at her. She grabbed a dish towel. "Boots off," she said. "They're sneakers." "Eli." He sat down on the floor right there, in the middle of the cafe, and started working on his laces. Avery soaked up the juice, wrung out the towel in the sink behind the counter, and checked the clock. 15 minutes before Donna came in to take over the morning rush. 15 minutes of keeping her son from dismantling the shop, getting the first round of orders out before the line hit the door, and making sure the espresso machine didn't jam again because the grind setting was still off from where Marcus had fiddled with it yesterday and never fixed it. 15 minutes. She could survive 15 minutes. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't reach for it. Whatever it was, the answer was no. The answer to most things was no, lately. No to the landlord's second rent increase in 8 months. No to the loan she'd applied for in March to finally replace the refrigeration unit that made a sound like a dying animal after midnight. No to her mother, who called every Sunday to ask when Avery was going to stop throwing her life away in a coffee shop and come back to Milwaukee where people could help her. No. She helped Eli up off the floor, tucked his wet sneakers behind the counter, and handed him a dry pair from the backpack she kept under the register. The fact that she kept a dry pair of sneakers under the register was not something she'd planned to be true about her life at 31. But here she was. "Sit in the corner booth," she told him. "Read. Don't talk to customers." What if they talked to me? Be polite, then stop talking. He took his backpack and went. She watched him go, the way he walked, a little bow-legged, a little bouncy, like the ground was never quite flat enough for his satisfaction. And something in her chest did the thing it always did, that awful lurching mix of love and fear that had no name and no cure. She turned back to the counter, the rain picked up against the front windows. By 11, the cafe had thinned out, the way it always did mid-morning when the breakfast crowd dissolved and the lunch crowd hadn't decided to be a crowd yet. Avery ran a fresh batch of grounds, counted the drawer, wiped the machine. Donna had taken over the register. Marcus was doing something with a fuse box in the back hallway that Avery had specifically told him not to do without calling an electrician first. But Marcus had a relationship with electrical systems that could only be described as adversarial optimism, so she'd given up. She was restocking the syrup shelf when the door opened. She didn't look up. The bell above the door rang 100 times a day, and she'd trained herself out of looking up at it. She just said, without turning, "Sit anywhere. Someone will be right with you." No answer. She registered the silence the way you register a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Not consciously, not immediately, but something in her body knew before her brain did. The cafe had gone quieter. Not empty quiet, but waiting quiet. the way a room shifts when someone walks in who changes the weight of the air. She turned around. There were 3 of them. 2 men flanking the door, big and still and dressed in dark jackets, the kind of men who didn't need to raise their voices to be threatening. And 1 man standing slightly ahead of them, water running off the shoulders of a black overcoat, his eyes already on her before she'd even fully turned around. She felt her hand go cold on the syrup bottle. She felt the shelf edge dig into the small of her back, because she'd taken a half step backward without meaning to. She felt, in the specific way you feel something you'd buried so deep you'd convinced yourself it was gone, every year of the last 12 years collapse in on themselves like a building going down. Damien Vescari. He looked exactly like himself. That was the cruelest part of it. She'd spent years, actual years, in the early days, lying in the dark with a baby she hadn't planned for and a silence where his voice used to be, trying to convince herself she'd misremembered him, that she'd built him up in her mind into something he wasn't, gilded the memory, smoothed the edges the way you do with things that hurt you. She'd told herself the boy she remembered was an invention, a story she'd told herself to make the leaving mean something. But he was standing in her cafe, and he looked exactly like himself, just older, just more, like someone had taken everything she remembered and sharpened it down to something harder and colder, and completely without apology. The scar she didn't remember, a thin line along his jaw, old and pale, the width of his shoulders, the way he stood, not aggressive, not anxious, just absolutely, terrifyingly still. His eyes were still the same color. She hated that. She didn't move. He didn't move. The 2 men at the door were watching the room, and she understood in a dim, remote way that this was not a casual lunch stop. You didn't roll up to a corner cafe on the north side with flanking security for a casual lunch stop. She realized, with the slow horror of someone watching a car slide on ice, exactly who Damien Vescari had become. She'd heard the name. Everyone in Chicago had heard the name. You didn't have to be connected to anything to hear the name Vescari. It moved through the city the way weather moved, diffuse and inevitable, showing up in whispered conversations and newspaper back sections, and the particular way people's voices got careful when it came up. She'd heard it, and she'd filed it under things that had nothing to do with her, because it didn't. Because why would it? Because the boy she'd loved at 19 was a boy, and boys didn't become that. Except apparently they did. He walked toward the counter. She didn't run. She had nowhere to run to and nowhere to be but here, and she wasn't the kind of person who ran anymore anyway. She'd run out of that particular luxury around the time she'd applied for WIC benefits with a 3-month-old strapped to her chest. She put the syrup bottle on the counter between them. He looked at it, then he looked at her. "Coffee," he said. His voice was lower than she remembered. That was different. Everything else was the same. "Sure," she said. Her own voice came out steady, which surprised her enough that she almost lost it. "What kind?" "Whatever you have. I have about 12 kinds." Black. She turned to the machine, her back to him. She could feel him watching her, felt it across her shoulders, down her spine, that specific pressure of being looked at by someone who knows how to look. She tamped the grounds, ran the shot. Her hands didn't shake. She was proud of that in a way that shamed her a little. She turned back and put the cup in front of him. He didn't pick it up right away. He was looking at her neck. She knew what he was looking at. Her hand went to the compass before she could stop it. A reflex, a giveaway. She hated herself for it. And her fingers closed around the silver pendant, small, worn smooth at the edges from years of the same gesture. He'd bought it from a street vendor on the lakefront, $20, probably less, and he'd fastened it around her neck himself and said, "It means you'll find your way back to whatever matters." And she'd laughed at him because it was a little corny, and then she'd worn it for 12 years because she was apparently a person who wore a dead promise around her neck like a talisman. Damien's jaw moved. Something crossed his face. Not readable, not quite, but there and then gone. He picked up the coffee, drank it standing. "How much?" he said. $3.50. He put a $100 bill on the counter. "Keep it." He turned and walked out. The 2 men at the door went with him. The black convoy outside swallowed them up and pulled into traffic and disappeared. and the cafe went back to its ordinary sounds. The espresso machine cycling down, Marcus swearing at the fuse box, Eli asking Donna if he could have a cookie. Avery stood at the counter with the $100 bill under her palm and her other hand still pressed to the compass at her throat, and she thought, with absolute clarity, that she was going to be sick. She wasn't, but it was close. He came back the next day. Same time, same overcoat. Different men at the door, but the same stillness, the same weight in the room when he walked in. He sat at the counter this time, actually sat, folded himself onto one of the stools with the particular deliberateness of a person who is always aware of every sightline in a room, and he ordered black coffee again, and he drank it without looking at his phone or talking to anyone. He looked at her, not aggressively, not with anything she could name and object to. He just looked at her the way you look at something you're trying to solve. She brought him the coffee. She didn't say anything beyond what the transaction required. Neither did he. He left another 100. She put it in the register this time instead of folding it into her pocket because the pocket felt like something and the register was just business. On the third day, she said, "You don't have to leave 100 every time." "I know. It's uncomfortable." "For who?" She looked at him. "What do you want, Damien?" He turned the coffee cup in his hands, slowly, the way someone turns a thought over before they decide what to do with it. "Nothing yet," he said. She didn't know what to do with that, so she walked away. He finished his coffee and left. Another 100 on the counter. On the fourth day, Eli was there. He shouldn't have been. Avery's babysitting arrangement had fallen through the night before. The neighbor girl who watched him in the mornings had a fever, and the daycare didn't open until 8, so Avery had brought him in early and set him up in the corner booth with his tablet and strict instructions to be invisible. He was being invisible, mostly. He was 6 and had the attention span of a distracted sparrow, but he was trying. She saw Damien notice him. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment of electric recognition, no cinematic pause. Damien came in, sat at the counter, accepted his coffee. His eyes moved across the room the way they always did. A sweep, automatic, assessing, and landed on the corner booth for 3 seconds longer than anywhere else. 3 seconds. Avery felt the air change. She set the coffee down in front of him harder than she intended. He looked at it, then at her. "Yours?" he said. One word, flat. "Yes," she said. He nodded once, looked back down at his coffee. She watched him from the far end of the counter for the next 40 minutes. He didn't look at Eli again, not obviously, not in a way that Eli would notice or that anyone watching would clock. But twice she caught the angle of his head, the slight tilt that meant he was tracking something in his peripheral vision, and both times the angle was pointed at the corner booth. Doing the math. She could see him doing the math from across the room. She knew the math. She'd been living inside the math for 6 years. 6 years old, 12 years gone, the timing that anyone with a functioning brain and 2 minutes of attention would land on eventually. She told herself it didn't matter because Damien was gone. Damien was a ghost. Damien was a name that showed up in the news attached to things she didn't want to think about, and never in her cafe, never in her corner of the city, never anywhere near the small and careful life she'd constructed around the wreckage he'd left behind. She'd been wrong about that. He finished his coffee, put on his coat, stood. He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "His name," he said. Not a question. She should have said something sharp. She should have said something that put distance between them, something that made clear this was not a conversation she was willing to have in her cafe in front of her customers with her son 10 feet away, eating a granola bar and watching cartoons on a tablet. "Eli," she said. She didn't know why she answered. She'd been answering him before she'd meant to since the first day he walked in, and she hated that too. Hated that 12 years of distance and grief and anger hadn't changed the basic wiring of her, hadn't made her immune to whatever it was about him that had always made her answer before she thought. Damien Vescari looked across the cafe at her son. Eli looked up, the way kids do when they feel eyes on them, and looked directly at Damien with the total guilelessness of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to be afraid of the weight in a room. Damien looked at the boy's face for 4 seconds. Then he walked out. She closed the cafe early that night. It wasn't something she did. Closing early meant lost revenue, and lost revenue meant the gap between the month's income and the month's expenses grew another inch in the wrong direction, and that gap was already intimate enough that she felt it every time she opened her banking app. But she needed the night. She needed the quiet and the locked door and the absence of the particular kind of pressure that had been building in her chest since Tuesday. She sat at the counter after Eli was asleep. She didn't drink. She pressed her palms flat on the bar top and looked at the wall. 12 years ago, Damien Vescari had been 20 years old, a kid from Bridgeport who ran small jobs for his uncle's operation and talked about getting out like it was a destination he'd already bought tickets for. He was smart and reckless, and he made her laugh in a way that felt like being shaken loose from something. And she'd loved him with the totality that you can only manage when you're 19 and still believe love is a problem you can solve with enough of it. He'd left one morning, a text, 14 words, "I have to go, I'm sorry, don't wait for me." And that was it. She hadn't waited. She'd tried not to wait. She'd found out 2 months later that she was pregnant, and she'd sat on the bathroom floor of her mother's house in Milwaukee, and she'd made a decision, and the decision was this. She was not going to build a life around an absence. She was going to build a life. It had taken everything she had. It was still taking everything she had. And now he was coming into her cafe every day and drinking her coffee and looking at her son with those careful, calculating eyes, and she did not know what he was going to do with what he was clearly already starting to understand, and that terrified her in a way that nothing in the last 6 years had terrified her. Because Damien Vescari wasn't a boy anymore, and whatever he was now could reach into her life and change the shape of it in ways she had no defense against. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. It buzzed again. On the third buzz, she picked up. Silence on the line for a moment. Then, his voice. "I know about the letters, Avery." She stopped breathing. "What letters?" she said, but the words came out wrong. Too slow, too careful, the shape of someone who already knows the answer and is just buying time to catch up to it. "The ones I sent you," Damien said, "every week for 4 months. I know you never got them. I know what happened to them. And I think you need to know too." The clock above the counter ticked. "Who told you?" "Someone I should have trusted a long time ago," he said. "Someone who's been trying to tell me for years." A pause. "There are things you don't know about why I left, about what I thought you'd done." The cafe was very quiet. "Meet me tomorrow," he said. "Not the cafe. Somewhere I can talk without my guys in the room." "I don't think that's—" "Avery." His voice dropped, stripped of something. She hadn't heard his voice sound like that in 12 years. "Please." She pressed her hand to the compass at her throat without knowing she was doing it. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the 14 words. "I have to go. I'm sorry. Don't wait for me." She thought about Milwaukee and the bathroom floor and the decision she'd made. She thought about Eli asleep upstairs. The sound of his breathing through the baby monitor she still kept on out of habit. That soft rhythm that was the metronome of everything she'd built. She thought about 4 months of letters she had never received. "Where?" she said. He told her. She hung up and sat in the dark cafe for a long time afterward, the compass warm in her hand, and she thought about what it meant to find something you'd buried under enough years that you'd started to believe it was gone. Nothing good, probably. But she was going to find out anyway. She lay on her side in the dark with her phone face down on the nightstand, and she stared at the water stain on the ceiling above her bed, the one shaped like nothing in particular, the one she'd been meaning to have looked at for 8 months. And she listened to the sound of Eli breathing through the monitor, and she tried to make herself feel something clean and simple about what she'd agreed to do in the morning. She couldn't. What she felt was the way you feel when you've been holding a door shut with your body weight for so long that your muscles have forgotten what it's like to stand upright, and then something on the other side stops pushing, and you don't know whether to stay braced or let go, and the not knowing is somehow worse than the weight was. She got up at 4:30. She wasn't going to sleep, and pretending otherwise was just lying down in the dark, wasting time. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window in her socks and her flannel sleep shirt, and she watched the city do its pre-dawn thing. The garbage truck 2 blocks over, the lights in the apartment across the alley where someone worked night shifts, the rain, always the rain in November, coming down thin and gray against the streetlights. She drank her coffee. She thought about 4 months of letters she had never received, and a boy who had maybe sent them, and 12 years of building a life on the assumption that the silence was the answer. She thought about Eli's face when he'd looked up at Damien across the cafe, that open, unguarded 6-year-old look before you learned to put anything between yourself and the world. She drained her cup, rinsed it, put it on the rack. She was not going to fall apart about this. She had already decided she was not going to fall apart about this. The place he'd named was a diner on Fulton Street, the kind that had been there since before the neighborhood gentrified and had refused to update itself in protest. Vinyl seats cracked along the seams, coffee in ceramic mugs, a counter with spinning stools, and a laminated menu with items that hadn't changed price since 2009. It opened at 6. Avery got there at 5:55 and sat in a booth near the back with her coat still on and her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she didn't need, and watched the door. He walked in at 6:01, alone. That was the first surprise. No flanking men, no overcoat. He was wearing a dark sweater and dark pants, and he looked, in the gray morning light of a Fulton Street diner, almost like a person instead of a weight system. Almost. He sat down across from her. The booth was narrow enough that his knees bumped the table. He looked at her coffee. "You want something to eat," he said. "No. I'm going to order eggs." "Damien." He looked at her. "Just say it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bus went by. A waitress came and he ordered eggs, scrambled, toast, 2 coffees. The waitress left. He put both hands flat on the table and he looked at them like they belonged to someone else. "There was a man named Caruso," he said. "Sal Caruso. He worked under my uncle. He ran communications. Who talked to who, messages in and out, that whole operation." He stopped. "He also ran interference when it suited him. Kept information from people who shouldn't have been kept from it. Arranged things." "What things?" "He intercepted my letters. Every one of them, steamed them, read them, sealed them back up, and sent them somewhere they'd never reach you." He looked up. "He had someone on your end, too. Your mother's address? That's where I was sending them. Someone who was picking up the mail before you ever saw it." The diner noise continued around them, ordinary and indifferent. Plates, the bell above the door, someone laughing at the counter. Avery set her mug down carefully. "My mother's address?" "Yes." "Who was on my end?" "I don't know yet. That's still—" He pressed his jaw. "I'm still working on that." "What did the letters say?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. She'd meant it to be flat, practical, a request for information. It didn't come out that way. Damien looked at her for a long moment. The waitress came back with his eggs. He didn't touch them. "That I hadn't chosen to leave," he said. "That I'd been pulled out by my uncle the night before. No warning, no choice. Something had happened with the organization, and my uncle decided he needed me in New York, and there was no room in that conversation for what I wanted." He exhaled. "That I was trying to get back. That I needed time to get clear of it. That I—" He stopped. "That you what?" "That I loved you," he said. "That I was coming back." The words sat on the table between them like something physical. Avery looked at the window, at the rain on the glass, at nothing. "And on your end," she said. "What did they tell you?" "That you'd moved on. There were photographs. A man. Looked domestic. Looked real." His voice was controlled, but barely. She could hear the seams. "I was 20 years old, and I was in a city I didn't want to be in, and I was already drowning in things I didn't know how to handle. And I looked at those photographs, and He stopped again. "I believed them. That's the truth of it. I believed them because believing them was easier than the alternative. The alternative being that I'd lost you to something I could have fought if I'd known to fight it." The eggs were getting cold. Neither of them was eating. Avery pressed her thumb against the handle of her mug until she could feel the ceramic edge dig into the skin. "I was pregnant," she said. She hadn't planned to say it like that. Straight, flat, no cushion. But there wasn't a gentle way to shape it. And she was tired of Gentle, and he was sitting across from her with his face doing that controlled devastation thing, and she needed him to understand the full weight of what those letters not arriving had cost. Damien went very still. "I was 2 months along when you left," she said. "I found out 4 weeks after you sent the text. I tried to reach you. The number didn't work. I didn't have anything else. Your uncle's people wouldn't talk to me. I was 19 years old and I was alone and I—" She stopped, breathed. "I made decisions. I built something, and I decided a long time ago that you had chosen your world over me, and that was the end of it." The diner continued happening around them. Damien's hands, still flat on the table, had gone white at the knuckles. "Eli," he said. His voice had changed completely. All the control gone. Just the sound of a man landing somewhere he hadn't known was coming. "Yes." He said nothing. She watched him process it, watched it move through him the way something structural moves through a building, not a surface crack, but a deep internal shift, the kind that changes the load distribution forever. "He doesn't know anything about you," she said. "I never told him you were gone. I told him his father wasn't in the picture. That's all he has." "Avery, I am not asking for anything from you," she said, and her voice came out harder than she expected, harder than she'd even known she had stored up. "I came here because you said there were things I needed to know, and I came because Eli deserves a mother who doesn't make decisions based on incomplete information. But I am not here to negotiate anything. I am not here to rebuild anything. I am here because you called and said please, and I was stupid enough to still respond to that, apparently." His jaw was working. His eyes were doing something she'd seen once, a long time ago, when he'd found out his uncle had lied to him about something small, and Damien had stood in the alley behind the apartment and just breathed until the anger reconfigured itself into something he could carry. Same thing happening now, larger scale. "The man who arranged all of it," he said. "Sal Caruso. He's been with my organization for 9 years. Something in his voice made her look up. "He's not running mail interference anymore," Damien said. "He's moved up. His position is sensitive. He has information, connections. Removing him isn't simple." "I'm not asking you to remove anyone." "I know." He picked up a fork, put it down. "But the reason I'm telling you this, the reason I needed you to know, is that he knows I started looking. He knows I've been pulling on this thread. And Sal Caruso is a man who responds to threats before they fully form." The diner noise seemed quieter now. "What does that mean?" Avery said slowly. "It means the safest assumption is that he knows about you. He knew about you 12 years ago. If he's monitoring my patterns—" Damien looked at her. "He knows I've been coming to your cafe." She felt the cold start at the back of her neck. "You came to my cafe," she said, 4 days in a row. "With an armed escort." "I know. You came to my place of business, where my son is, and you made me visible. I didn't know, when I first came in, that Eli was— He is." Her voice cracked on it, then steadied. "He is. And now there is a man in your organization who might be watching you, and who would look at me and at Eli and see—" "Leverage," Damien said. "Yes, I know what he would see." The word sat there. Leverage. Her son. 6 years old, bow-legged walk, granola bar, tablet, not yet afraid of the weight in a room. Leverage. "I need you to let me put someone on your building," Damien said. "Tonight. Just no. Avery. No." She was already reaching for her coat. "You don't get to walk back into my life and start making security decisions about where my son sleeps. You don't get to—" "2 men, outside. You wouldn't see them. That is not the point." She stood up. Her knee hit the table and the coffee sloshed. "The point is that your world was supposed to have nothing to do with me. The point is that every single time your world has touched mine, it has cost me something I didn't get back." He looked up at her from the booth. He didn't stand. He just looked at her with that face, that controlled, careful, wrecked face, and said, I know what it's cost, and I'm asking you to let me fix one part of it before someone else decides to cost you more." She stood there with her coat half on and her hand on the edge of the table, and the rain coming down outside, and 12 years of architecture she'd built out of necessity and loss, and she felt it all under a very particular kind of pressure. She thought about Eli.
She thought about leverage. She sat back down.
She went back to the cafe, and she went through the motions of the day, and she didn't tell Donna anything, and she didn't tell Marcus anything. And when Eli asked why she looked tired, she told him she hadn't slept well. And he said grown-ups never sleep well, and she said that was probably true. At 2 in the afternoon, a man she didn't recognize came in and sat at the counter and ordered a black coffee and didn't look at her any more than a regular customer would. But when she brought him his coffee, he said, very quietly, "Mr. Vescari asked me to introduce myself. My name is Cole. I'll be outside from 9 to 5 every day." And then he drank his coffee like she wasn't there. She went to the back and stood in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the storage room with her back against the wall and her eyes closed for 90 seconds. Then she went back out front and kept working. 3 days later, Marcus found something under the dumpster behind the cafe. He came in white-faced and pulled Avery into the back, and he showed her on his phone, hands shaking slightly, a photograph he'd taken of it before he'd done what she was about to yell at him for not doing, calling her first before he touched anything. It was a tracker, small, magnetic, the kind that sticks to metal surfaces and pings location data. Marcus had found it on the underside of her car. "How long's it been there?" she said. I don't know. I just happened to look when I was..." "Call the number Cole gave me." "Who's Cole?" "Just call the number." Cole picked up in one ring. He came around back in 4 minutes, looked at the tracker on Marcus's phone screen, and made a call of his own. His voice was very low and very calm, which was somehow worse than if he'd reacted. She stood in the alley behind her cafe in the November cold, and she looked at the tracker photograph, and she understood, in the wordless and absolute way you understand things that are already happening to you, that the shape of her life had changed again. She called Damien. He picked up in 2 rings. "Someone's been watching my car," she said. "There was a tracker." Silence on his end. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of someone calculating something very fast. "Are you at the cafe?" "Yes." "Is Eli with you?" "He's at the daycare. He gets picked up at..." She checked her watch. 2 hours. "Don't pick him up from the regular spot," Damien said. His voice had shifted entirely. Not cold, not unkind, but operating in a register that was purely functional now, all personal weight stripped out of it in favor of logistics. "I'll have someone go through a different route. Give me the address." "I am not giving you my son's daycare address." "Then go get him yourself right now and take him somewhere he's never been with you before. A friend's place, a store, anywhere that's not on your regular pattern. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. He hung up. She stood in the alley. She thought about sitting on a bathroom floor in Milwaukee at 19 with a decision to make, and how the decision had been hard, but it had felt like hers, like something she had agency over, like the shape of what came next was at least partially in her hands. This didn't feel like that. This felt like being inside something that had already started, something with its own momentum and its own direction, and the only choice she had was how to move inside it. She went inside. She grabbed her keys. "Donna," she called out to the front. "I have to leave early. Close up for me." Donna looked at her face and didn't ask a single question. Simone. She had Eli at her friend Petra's apartment on the west side by 3. She told Petra it was a plumbing emergency. The weakest possible lie. But Petra was the kind of friend who had the grace to accept weak lies when your face made clear you couldn't offer better. And she settled Eli on the couch with Petra's dog and Petra's collection of animated movies, and she went out into the stairwell and she called Damien back. "He's safe," she said. "He's somewhere new. What's happening?" The tracker was placed sometime in the last 4 days. His voice was the same stripped functional register. "My people are pulling footage from cameras near your block. We should have something in a few hours." "Is it Caruso?" A pause. "Probably," Damien said. "He's..." Another pause, and this one had something different in it, something she recognized as a man choosing his words for her benefit, and she hated that, hated being managed. But she also had her son in a stranger-to-him apartment, hiding from something she didn't fully understand, so she let it go. "He's escalating faster than I expected," Damien said. "He shouldn't know yet how much I know. Someone in my circle is feeding him information. There's a leak." Yes. So your organization, which I was never supposed to be any part of, has a leak. And the leak is feeding information about me to the man who destroyed our lives 12 years ago. And my son is, I know. Don't say I know, she said, and her voice broke on the last word. Not into tears, into something harder than tears. Something past the place where crying was the response. Don't just say I know like that's... I'm fixing it. His voice had shifted again, down, lower, back to something human under the function. I am going to fix it. But I need a day to find the leak, and I need you to stay away from the cafe, and I need... His voice stopped. She heard something in the background, not loud, but she heard it, the specific sound of someone coming into a room and changing the air. Damien. Her own voice went flat and cold. What just happened? A beat. 2. Then, I need you to stay where you are, he said. Don't move, Eli. Don't... A sound. Not a voice. Closer to a crack. The line went... Avery stood in the stairwell of Petra's building with the phone pressed to her ear, and the silence coming through it like a physical thing, like something with weight and temperature. And she listened to that silence for 3 full seconds before her brain caught up to what her body already knew. She called back. It rang, went to nothing. Not voicemail, just a flat cessation of signal, the kind that meant the phone wasn't turned off but wasn't reachable, which was a different thing, a worse thing. She called Cole. Cole picked up in one ring. Something happened to Damien, she said. The call dropped and it wasn't a drop. Someone came into the room. I heard, I know, Cole said. His voice was clipped. She could hear movement in the background, doors, fast footsteps. Stay where you are. Don't use your regular car. Don't... What happened to him? A pause that was too short to mean nothing and too long to mean fine. We're getting information, Cole said. Stay where you are. He hung up. She stood in the stairwell. The fluorescent light above her buzzed with that particular institutional frequency that seemed designed to make everything feel more desperate than it already was. She looked at her phone. She looked at the door to Petra's apartment, behind which her son was watching something animated and laughing at the dog. She put her back against the wall, and she breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way the pediatric nurse had taught her when Eli was 4 months old and colicky, and she'd been awake for 31 hours, and she'd sat in the rocking chair in the corner of her Milwaukee bedroom and just breathed because breathing was the only thing she had agency over. Same technique now, different crisis. She went back inside. She sat next to Eli on the couch. She put her arm around him, and he leaned into her without looking away from the screen, the automatic lean of a child who has always found his mother's arm to be a reliable piece of architecture. And she stared at the animated shapes moving on Petra's television, and she waited. Cole called back 47 minutes later. She stepped back into the stairwell. Petra shot her a look as she went. Not a question, just an acknowledgement. The face of a woman who understands that some things are happening that she is not going to be told about, and has decided to be okay with that. Damien's alive, Cole said, before she could ask. She let out a breath she'd been holding so long it had become structural. There was an incident at the Wicker Park property, Cole said. Someone got through the perimeter. It was contained. He's not seriously hurt, but we've moved him and the situation is... A pause. The situation is complicated. Who got through? We don't know yet. Cole. We genuinely don't know yet, Ms. Hale. What we know is that it was coordinated and it happened within an hour of the tracker information moving through our internal channels, which confirms the leak. The leak. Someone inside Damien's organization who had fed Caruso the timeline, who had known about the tracker discovery and called it in fast enough that someone could move on Damien's location within the hour. How many people knew about the tracker? She said. Small number. That's being... How many? 6. Including me. She said nothing. I understand what that sounds like, Cole said, and his voice was very controlled, the voice of a man who has spent time in rooms where everyone is a suspect and has learned to speak carefully inside that reality. I am aware of how that sounds. One of 6 people in Damien's inner circle is feeding information to the man who wants him dead. Yes.
And those 6 people are also the 6 people responsible for making sure my son is safe. A beat. Yes, Cole said.
She pressed her thumb hard into the edge of her phone case, hard enough to feel it. "Where is Damien now?" she said. "I can't give you that location over the phone." "Then come get me." "Ms. Hale, the safest thing for you and your son is to stay. If one of your 6 people is compromised, then wherever you're telling me to stay is only as safe as the compromised person allows it to be." She heard her own voice, and it surprised her. Not the words, but the temperature of them, cold and precise, stripped of the panic she was genuinely feeling somewhere underneath. "Come get me. Or tell me where he is. One or the other." A long pause. "I'll come get you," Cole said. 40 minutes. She told Petra she needed to leave Eli there overnight. Petra said of course without blinking, and then she took Avery's arm in the kitchen while Eli was distracted by the dog, and she said quietly, "Are you in trouble?" "Not me," Avery said. "Someone near me is." "Do you need me to call anyone?" "No." Petra looked at her for a moment with the particular look of a woman who has known another woman long enough to understand when she's decided something and when that decision is final. "Okay," she said. "He can stay as long as you need. I'll tell him it's an adventure." Avery went in and hugged Eli hard enough that he complained, "Mom, you're squishing. Tough." He hugged her back because he was 6 and still did that automatically, and she pressed her face into the top of his head and breathed in the specific smell of him. Cheap shampoo, something vaguely like outside air, the particular warm bread smell that had lived at the crown of his head since he was an infant, and that she was privately terrified would disappear one day when he got older. "Be good," she said. "I'm always good." "You're frequently good," she said. "There's a difference." He laughed. She made herself let go. Cole drove a dark sedan and said almost nothing for the first 15 minutes. Avery sat in the passenger seat and watched Chicago move past the windows, the city doing its evening thing. Lights coming on, traffic thickening, the lake showing itself in gray glimpses between buildings. "Tell me about Victor Soren," she said. Cole's hands adjusted on the wheel, a small movement, involuntary. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "I didn't. I'm telling you to tell me about him." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you know?" "Nothing, but Damien mentioned a mentor once, a long time ago, someone who shaped him before his uncle did. And the way you just reacted to that name tells me it's relevant." Cole drove. The city moved past. "Victor Soren was Damien's uncle's partner," Cole said finally. "Original organization 20 years ago. He was the architect of a lot of things, strategy, expansion, the financial structures. Smart man, very patient." He paused. "When Damien's uncle died 4 years ago and control of the organization shifted to Damien, Soren stepped back, publicly. He took a consulting role, removed himself from the active structure. But Sal Caruso has been Soren's man since before Damien took over." Cole's voice had gone flat and careful. "We've suspected it for a while. Damien suspected it. The difficulty is that suspicion isn't the same as proof, and moving on a man like Soren without proof is—" He stopped. "It creates problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that have other men making decisions about who they back." She understood that. The organizational logic of it. Move on Soren wrong, without the support of enough of the right people, and you fracture the coalition. Turn a Cold War hot before you've secured enough of the board. "Soren wants the organization back," she said. "Soren never stopped thinking it was his," Cole said. "Damien's uncle was a symbol. Damien is an obstacle. And I'm leverage." "And Eli is leverage," Cole said, and his voice was even, and he said it like a fact because it was a fact, and neither of them benefited from pretending otherwise. She looked out the window. "How long to wherever we're going?" she said. 10 minutes. The safe house was a narrow brownstone in Pilsen, the kind of building that looked like every other building on the block and was intended to. Cole took her in through a side entrance. 2 men in the hallway she didn't know. A set of stairs. A room on the second floor that had been converted into something between an office and a command post. Maps on one wall, a table with laptops, 3 men she didn't know, and Damien. He was sitting in a chair at the far end of the table. His left hand was wrapped, not heavily, no cast, but gauze and medical tape from the knuckles to halfway up the forearm. There was a cut along his hairline, closed but recent, the kind of thing that had bled more than it had hurt. His shirt was different from this morning, which meant someone had brought him a change, which meant the shirt from this morning had been a reason to change. He looked up when she came in. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, and she looked at his wrapped hand and his cut hairline and the overall quality of him, which was alive and present and doing that controlled devastation thing with his face again. "What happened to your hand?" she said. "Window frame." "You went through a window." "Someone came through a window. There was a disagreement about direction." He looked at her face. "I told Cole to keep you—" Cole made a judgment call. "Cole," Damien said, with a specific flatness that meant this conversation with Cole was not over, made a judgment call. Cole, behind her, said nothing. She pulled a chair out from the table and sat down across from Damien, and she looked at the maps on the wall and the laptops and the men she didn't know, and she said, "Tell me about Victor Soren." The room went quiet in an interesting way. Damien looked at her, then at Cole, then back at her. "How much did he tell you?" "Enough to know you haven't told me enough." Damien was quiet for a moment. He turned his wrapped hand over on the table, looked at it, turned it back. "Soren orchestrated the letters," he said. "Not Caruso. Caruso was the mechanism. Soren was the reason. He needed me broken from anything that would give me a reason to stay human." He said the last two words with a precision that made them land hard. A man who has someone to come back to is a man with a divided loyalty. Soren needed me entirely inside the organization. No exits, no alternatives. "He was building you," she said. "He was building a version of me that was useful to him." Damien's jaw tightened. He succeeded, mostly. For years. He looked at his hand again. "When I started coming into your cafe, he knew what it meant. Caruso flagged it to him within the first day." "And tonight?" "Tonight was a message." His eyes came up to hers. "He's not trying to kill me yet. Not until he's sure he has enough of the organization ready to flip. Tonight was him telling me that he can reach me when he wants to." "And the leak," she said. "The one in your 6. The room was very still. Damien said nothing. And in that nothing, she felt something shift, felt the shape of what he wasn't saying. And she looked around the room at the 3 men she didn't know and at Cole behind her, and she thought about 6 people and a tracker and 47 minutes and a phone call made in a hallway. She looked at Cole. Cole's face was exactly right, exactly the correct amount of professional neutral, not a flicker. Which was, she realized, one thing too controlled. She thought about Cole picking up in one ring, every time. About Cole knowing things, the Wicker Park property, the movement, the 47 minutes of getting information, slightly faster than the math allowed. About Cole's voice when she'd asked about Victor Soren. "Where did you hear that name?" Not who told you. Where did you hear it? The distinction between a man asking where information came from and a man checking what she actually knew. She looked at Damien. He was already looking at her. And in the half-second of eye contact between them, she understood 2 things simultaneously. That he had known, or nearly known, for longer than tonight, and that he had brought her here anyway, and she did not yet know what to do with that second thing. "Cole," Damien said. Very quiet, very even. Cole said nothing. "How long?" Damien said. The room had gone the kind of still that has weight. The 2 men at the far wall had shifted. Small movements, repositioning, the body language of people waiting for a signal. Cole exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that has something final in it. 8 months, Cole said. Damien closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, opened them. "The letters," Avery said. She couldn't stop herself. She was looking at Cole, and she was thinking about 8 months, and she was doing different math now, different and worse. "Did you know about the letters before tonight?" Cole looked at her. His face had changed. The professional neutral was gone, replaced by something more honest and more terrible, the face of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just put it down. "Soren told me," Cole said, "when he brought me in. He told me everything he'd done. He told me about you, about the letters, about Eli. He paused. He told me as a demonstration, to show me how completely he could reshape a situation, how patient he was. You knew Eli was Damien's son, she said, before Damien did. Yes. The word hit the room like something dropped from a height. Damien stood up. He didn't move toward Cole. He just stood, and the standing itself was a kind of pressure, the full weight of him vertical and directed. Why bring her here? Damien said. His voice was almost gentle. Almost. If you're Soren's, why bring her here? Cole looked at the floor. Because I'm done, he said. 8 months and I'm done. I didn't sign up for a kid being leveraged. That's not... He stopped. I'll give you everything I have on Soren's timeline. His assets, his people inside your organization, his next moves, all of it. I'll give you everything. You'll give me everything regardless, Damien said, still in that almost gentle voice. Cole looked up. He nodded, once. He understood what that meant, and he accepted it. And that acceptance was its own kind of information about how tired he was. Damien looked at the two men at the far wall, a short nod. They moved toward Cole, and Cole went with them without resistance, out the door, down the hall, and then the room was quieter. Avery sat at the table. She was looking at the maps on the wall without seeing them. She was thinking about 8 months. She was thinking about a man who had known about Eli, known the specific weight of that secret, and had been sitting across from her with it for days while she'd been calculating whether to trust him. She was thinking about how many other people Soren had inside Damien's world, how deep the rot went, how many of the 6 were actually 5, or 4, or fewer. She was thinking about Eli at Petra's apartment and Petra's address, and who had been in the room when she'd called Cole from that stairwell. The cold started at the back of her neck. Petra's address, she said. Damien looked at her. He'd already been thinking it. She could see that he'd already been thinking it, that the same sequence had run through him a few seconds ahead of her. I called Cole from the stairwell, she said. I gave him... Damien was already moving, already pulling out his phone. He made a call, 2 words, and listened, and whatever came back through the phone changed his face in a way that she had not yet seen it change. Not controlled devastation, not careful calculation, but something rawer than either of those, something that lived underneath all the architecture. He lowered the phone. Petra's building has 2 black sedans outside it, he said. They've been there for 20 minutes. The room tilted. Eli, she said, and the word came out of her like something torn. She was already standing, already moving toward the door. Damien's hand came out and caught her arm. Not hard, not restraining, but there, a physical fact. You can't go there, he said. That's what they want. You go there, you walk into it. That is my son. I know. His hand on her arm, his voice for the first time since she'd walked into this room, fully, without calculation or control. Just a man saying what was true. I know he is. He is mine too. And I am not going to let anything happen to him. But you walking into a controlled position is not how we get him out. He looked at her, straight and direct, no distance in it. Trust me. 12 years ago, she had trusted him, and he had sent 14 words and disappeared. 12 years later, he was standing in a safe house in Pilsen with a wrapped hand and a cut on his head, and his son 2 miles away with enemy cars outside, and he was asking her to trust him again. She looked at his face. She thought about the letters, about what had been done to both of them, about the fact that they had been broken apart by a patient and deliberate evil, and had both built lives inside the wreckage without knowing the other was doing the same, without knowing the wreckage had been engineered. She thought about Eli's face when he'd looked across the cafe at Damien, open, unguarded, before you learned to be afraid. What do we do? She said. Damien's hand released her arm. He turned to the remaining men in the room. Get the car, he said, and get me Soren's location. His voice had returned to the stripped functional register, the one that ran on logistics and left everything else for later. Not Caruso, Soren himself. He looked at the wall of maps. He's been patient for 12 years. He moved tonight because he thought he had control of the information. His jaw set. He doesn't know Cole gave us the timeline. He doesn't know we know what he's planning. And Petra's building, one of the men said. Damien picked up his phone again. He made a second call, longer this time, and when he hung up he said, There are 3 of our people 2 blocks from Petra's building. They were already moving before Cole gave us the address. He looked at Avery. I put them there this afternoon, before Cole came to get you, before I knew about the leak. She stared at him. I told you I'd fix it, he said. I meant I was already fixing it. You knew about Cole. I suspected. I needed to know what he'd do if I gave him access to you. Something crossed his face, not quite apology, not quite justification, something in the difficult territory between them. It was a risk I calculated. You used me as bait to confirm your leak. I used the situation, he said. There's a difference. That is a very fine distinction. I know. He held her eyes, and I would make the same call again, because the alternative was leaving the leak unconfirmed and having someone inside my circle with access to your location indefinitely. His voice dropped. I don't make clean choices. I make the choices that keep the people I... He stopped, redirected. I make the choices that work. The room was very quiet. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did at night. Indifferent and enormous and full of its own relentless motion, the city that had held both of them all this time without caring about either. Her son was 2 miles away in a building with black sedans outside it, and a man named Victor Soren somewhere in the city making patient architectural decisions about how to use a 6-year-old child to dismantle his former protege. And she was standing in a safe house in Pilsen looking at the man who had broken her heart and rebuilt himself into something she didn't fully recognize and asked her to trust him. And the terrible truth of it, the truth she had no clean way to sit with, was that she did not have the luxury of deciding whether to trust him. She only had the choice of what to do next. Tell me the plan, she said. Damien looked at her for one more second. Then he turned to the map on the wall, and his finger came down on a point near the harbor, and he said, Soren uses a shipping terminal on the south end of the Calumet River. Has for 15 years. It's off the books. Registered to a holding company that doesn't exist anymore, which means it doesn't appear in anything we've filed with anyone. He uses it for storage, for meetings, for situations that need to be contained. He looked at the men in the room. He'll move there tonight. When he finds out Cole is burned, he'll want to consolidate. Pull his people to a defensible position and wait to see how much damage he's taken. You want to hit him before he gets there, one of the men said. I want to hit him while he's moving, Damien said. In transit, before he's inside a fortified position with 20 men and 12 years of preparation. He looked at the man. Get the cars. Get Reyes and his team. Nobody moves until I have confirmation Eli is clear of Petra's building. The men moved. The room emptied to just Avery and Damien and the maps on the wall. She was looking at the harbor point, at the Calumet River terminal, at the distance between that point and Petra's building on the west side. If Soren finds out Cole is burned before you reach him, she said, he'll move faster, yes. How long do we have? Maybe 2 hours? Maybe less. He was already pulling on a jacket, checking something at his hip with the automatic gesture of a man who has done it 10,000 times. The 3 men near Petra's building, they're good. They'll get Eli out clean. I want to be there, she said. When they get him out, I know. Damien. He stopped, looked at her. Bring him to me before you go to the terminal, she said. 5 minutes. That's all I need. He looked at her for a long moment. The cut on his hairline had dried to a thin, dark line. His wrapped hand hung at his side. He looked like exactly what he was. A man in the middle of a war he'd been in for 12 years, tired in the deep way that doesn't come from one bad night, but from 10 years of bad nights, compounded into something structural. Okay, he said. They got Eli out of Petra's building at 9:47. Avery knew the moment it happened because her phone buzzed with a single text from a number she didn't know. Clear. And she was already in the car Cole had been using, now driven by one of Damien's men, parked 2 streets over from Petra's block. She watched the rearview mirror, watched the side street, watched the dark. A figure appeared at the corner, small, a man's arm around small shoulders, moving fast but not running. The particular urgent but calm pace of someone executing a rehearsed extraction, The kind of pace that doesn't frighten the person being extracted if they're 6 years old and don't fully understand what's happening. Eli was wearing his backpack. He was looking around with the bright, alert expression of a child who has decided this is an adventure and hasn't yet been given reason to decide otherwise. The car door opened and Eli climbed in and saw her and said, "Mom, these guys have really cool cars." And she pulled him into her chest and held on. He let her for about 4 seconds. Then, "Mom," squishing. "I know." She didn't let go. "Mom." She let go. She held his face in her hands and looked at him. All of him, every part. The bow-legged stance, even while sitting, the granola bar smell, the absolute undefended openness of his face. And she said, "You okay?" "Petra's dog threw up on my sock," he said. "It was pretty gross." "That sounds hard." It was really gross. He seemed to feel the seriousness of the moment pressing in, the way kids do, because they are more perceptive than adults give them credit for. He looked at her. "Are we in trouble?" "We're fine," she said. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at her when she said something he wasn't sure was completely true. A 6-year-old's version of skepticism. Not sophisticated, just present. "Okay," he said, because he trusted her, because that was still the most devastating fact in her life, that this person trusted her completely. The front door of the car opened and Damien got in the passenger seat. Eli looked at him. A long, uncomplicated child's stare. The kind that takes in information without yet knowing what to do with it. "You're the coffee man," Eli said. Damien turned in the seat and looked at Eli, and something happened in his face that was not the controlled devastation and not the stripped functional register, but something else entirely, something new, something that had no armor over it at all. "Yeah," Damien said. "You always leave a lot of money," Eli said. "Your mom's coffee is worth it." Eli considered this with the gravity of a small scholar. Then he nodded and looked out the window. Damien looked at Avery. She looked at him. There was no conversation that covered this. There was no version of this moment that had words adequate to it. This specific gathering in a dark car on a Chicago street of the 3 people who were the consequence of everything that had been done to them. She didn't try to find words. She just looked at him, and he looked at her, and across the 6 inches of air between them, 12 years of separated grief and accumulated damage acknowledged itself and kept going. "I have to move," Damien said. "I know." He looked at Eli one more time. Quick, careful, the look of someone storing something. Then he was out of the car, and the night took him. The shipping terminal on the Calumet River had been dormant for 11 years on paper. In practice, it was the opposite of dormant. Damien knew the layout from memory. He'd been brought here twice in his early years by Soren himself as a demonstration of what a well-constructed operation looked like. How you built a position with real walls and real exits and real leverage. He'd been 19 and he'd been impressed. He'd been meant to be. The convoy moved south on the Dan Ryan and cut east toward the river. 3 cars, 9 men plus Damien. Reyes rode in the second car. Stocky, quiet, the kind of efficient that didn't need to announce itself. And they communicated in short calls as they moved. Confirmation came at 10:22. Soren's car had left his Gold Coast residence. 2 vehicles, heading south. "He's moving to the terminal," Damien said. 18 minutes ahead of us, Reyes said over the phone. "Take the industrial bypass, cut the gap." Reyes cut the gap. They hit the terminal perimeter at 10:38. The rain had come back. Not the thin November drizzle of the morning, but real rain, the kind that made sound and obscured light and turned the ground into a problem. Damien got out of the car into it and felt the cold hit him across the face, and he welcomed it, the way you welcome something that sharpens the edges. The terminal was a complex of 3 main warehouses and a network of dock structures along the river, all connected by concrete service roads that flooded when it rained hard. The main structure, the one Soren would move to, the one with the reinforced doors and the backup power and the communications equipment, was the northernmost warehouse, the one with the red running lights along its roofline that never went off regardless of whether the facility was supposed to be operational. The red lights were on. Soren was already inside. Damien looked at the terminal. He looked at his 9 men. He thought about what Cole had given them before being walked out of the safe house. Soren's internal layout, the number of men he'd have with him, the position of the communications equipment that needed to be taken out first. He thought about 2 hours, maybe less, and how they'd taken 38 minutes to get here. "Reyes," he said. "Yeah." "East entrance, 3 minutes." Reyes nodded. He took 4 men and moved right into the rain and the dark, running low along the fence line. Damien took the remaining 4 and went straight at the main gate, which was not subtlety but was speed, and sometimes speed was the more important variable. The gate guard saw them at 20 feet. He had time to reach for something before Damien's lead man hit him with the flat professionalism of someone doing a job, and then they were through the gate and onto the service road, and the rain was loud on the corrugated metal walls of the warehouses. A shout from inside, then running footsteps on concrete. Then the night got very loud and very fast. Soren's men were good. That was the honest assessment. Damien had known it going in, and knowing it didn't make it easier to be inside it. They moved in coordinated pairs, they knew the building, and they had the advantage of a fortified interior position. Damien's team had speed and surprise burned off fast. The first 3 minutes were the worst. A running fight through the service corridor along the east wall. Reyes coming in from the right, Damien's team from the left. Soren's men caught between but not breaking, holding the corridor and returning fire with the controlled discipline of professionals. Damien moved through it the way he'd learned to move through things that were trying to kill him, low, fast, using every structural element as cover, his mind running 2 steps ahead of his body. His wrapped hand screamed every time he used it. He used it anyway. A man came around a steel support column, and Damien hit him once, hard, in the throat with his good hand, and the man went down and Damien kept moving. The communications room was 40 feet into the main warehouse, through a fire door that was currently shut and braced from the inside. Reyes reached it first and planted charges on the hinge side while Damien held the corridor behind him, and when the door blew, it blew clean and they were through. The communications equipment went in 30 seconds. Screens, transmitters, the satellite uplink that would have let Soren call in additional support from outside the city. 30 seconds of focused, ugly work, and then it was dark and quiet in the communications room, and Soren had no external reach. Damien looked at Reyes. Reyes had blood on his jaw from something that had happened in the corridor. His expression was identical to his resting expression. "How many left?" Damien said. 4 or 5. Soren's still in the main floor." "Then let's go get him." Victor Soren was 61 years old and had the build of a man who had spent 30 years ensuring he never had to do his own physical work. He was standing in the center of the main warehouse floor when Damien came through the interior door, standing with 2 men flanking him, both of whom were pointing weapons, both of whom were looking at the door with the expression of men who had already calculated the geometry and liked their position. Damien came through anyway. Reyes and 2 men came through behind him. A brief, brutal exchange, seconds, not longer. And then the 2 flanking men were no longer standing, and it was just Damien and Victor Soren in the main floor of the warehouse, with the rain hammering on the roof 40 feet above them, and the red running lights along the walls casting everything in that particular color. Soren looked at Damien. He looked exactly as Damien remembered him. That was the cruelest part of it. Older, obviously. The hair gone fully white, the face deeper cut, but the same quality in the eyes, that patient, assessing intelligence, the eyes of a man who is always calculating odds. "You move faster than I expected," Soren said. His voice was calm, genuinely calm, not performed calm, and that was more unsettling than anger would have been. "You got slow," Damien said. "I got comfortable." Soren's eyes moved across Damien's face. "You look like hell." "I've had a complicated week." "The woman," Soren said. Not a question. "Say her name and I'll break every bone in your hand," Damien said. Still quiet, still controlled. Soren smiled. It was an old man's smile, small and private, the smile of someone who has seen this particular dynamic before and finds it both understandable and limited. "I gave you everything, you know. Everything you are. I shaped you from a boy from Bridgeport who ran errands into the man who controls the most powerful organization in this city. He tilted his head. And you threw it away for a girl in a coffee shop. I threw it away for the right reasons, Damien said, which is something you never understood. I understood it perfectly. That's why I removed it. The warehouse was quiet except for the rain. Behind Damien, Reyes stood with the careful stillness of a man waiting for a signal. The letters, Damien said. Yes. The photographs, the man you manufactured. Composite work, very good contractor. Soren said it with genuine professional appreciation, the way someone discusses a well-executed project. You were 20 years old and in love and completely unable to think strategically while you were. I needed you strategic. He looked at Damien with something that was not quite remorse, but was adjacent to it, the closest a man like Soren could get to regret without fully arriving there. It worked, didn't it? For 12 years it worked. You became exactly what I needed you to become. And the boy, Soren's eyes shifted slightly. The boy was an unexpected variable, Soren said. I didn't know about the pregnancy when I made the original decision. I found out later, and by then, he paused. By then, the architecture was already in place. Introducing the information would have undone 12 years of construction. So you kept it from me. I protected the investment. A child, Damien said. You decided a child was an investment variable. I decided, Soren said with precise emphasis, that the organization I spent 30 years building was worth more than your personal complications. I still believe that. Damien looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the face of the man who had shaped him and used him and taken from him the 12 years that he could never get back. 12 years of Avery building a life alone. 12 years of Eli growing up without a father. 12 years of Damien becoming something harder and colder and more useful because all the softness had been surgically removed. He thought about the compass. The $20 street vendor compass he'd fastened around her neck at 19 because he'd been a romantic idiot and she'd laughed at him for it, and then worn it for 12 years. He thought about Eli looking at him in the car. You're the coffee man. You're done, Damien said. The organization is done. Not transferred, not restructured, done. I'm dismantling every piece of it that belongs to you, and every man who ever worked for you is going to understand that the affiliation is poison now. Soren looked at him, that patient intelligence still calculating. You can't. I'm already doing it. Damien kept his voice level. Cole gave me your entire network, every asset, every account, every man who flipped. I've spent the last 2 hours making calls. By morning, there won't be a corner of this city where the Soren name means anything except liability. For the first time, something changed in Soren's eyes. The calculation flickered. Behind it, something older and raw. The look of a man who has built his whole identity on a structure and is watching it lose its foundation. You'll destroy yourself in the process, Soren said. You can't burn my half without burning your own. I know. Then you're a fool. Yeah, Damien said. Probably. He nodded to Reyes. Reyes moved towards Soren, and Soren, for the first time in the conversation, for possibly the first time in 30 years, took a step back. Avery was in a car parked 3 blocks from the harbor when her phone buzzed. She'd been there for 40 minutes. She'd been told to stay where she was, Damien's instruction, relayed through one of his men who was driving, and she'd agreed because she'd had Eli asleep across her lap for the last 20 minutes, and she couldn't move anyway without waking him. He'd crashed hard, the way kids crash after an adrenaline-adjacent evening, the way they trust sleep completely because they don't yet know that sleep can be interrupted. His head was heavy on her thigh. His backpack was squashed under his arm. He was making the small sounds he made when he was deeply under. Not quite snoring, just a soft, rhythmic exhale that she could have picked out in a crowded room. She looked at her phone. 1 text from Damien's number, terminal secured, Soren contained. She exhaled. Then her phone rang. Different number. Unknown. She almost didn't answer it. She looked at Eli. She looked at the rain on the window. She answered. The voice on the other end was female, professional, flat. Ms. Hale, the voice said. My name is Tara Voss. I work for Victor Soren, The cold started at the back of Avery's neck again. Mr. Soren anticipated the possibility of this evening's outcome, the voice continued. He made contingency arrangements. One of those arrangements involves your son. My son is with me, Avery said. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. I'm aware, the voice said. The car you're in is currently being tracked. The driver you're with is one of Damien Vescari's men, which means he is effective against physical threats, but not against what I'm about to describe. A pause. Mr. Soren has documentation, medical records, financial records, records of conversations that would be very damaging to Mr. Vescari. Damaging in ways that would reach your son directly, legally, financially, structurally. The kind of damage that doesn't resolve in a single evening, regardless of what happens in a shipping terminal. What do you want? Avery said. Mr. Soren wants to walk away, the voice said. He wants the documentation held in reserve, and he wants Mr. Vescari to understand that burning the network means the documentation becomes active. You're telling me to pass a message. I'm telling you that the evening isn't over, the voice said, and that the next decision isn't Mr. Vescari's to make. It's yours. A click. The line went dead. Avery sat in the dark car with the rain on the windows and her son's weight on her leg and the compass warm at her throat. And she looked at the phone in her hand and she thought about contingency arrangements and documentation and the specific architecture of a patient man who had spent 30 years building structures with backup structures inside them. And she understood, in the coldest and most clarifying way, that Damien had not ended this tonight. He had only ended the part of it that Soren wanted him to end. She looked at the driver. I need you to take me to the terminal, she said. Mr. Vescari said, I know what he said. She looked at the man's eyes in the rearview mirror. Take me to the terminal. The driver looked at her for a moment. Whatever he saw in her face made him... The driver looked at her for a moment. Whatever he saw in her face made him put the car in drive. The terminal was 12 minutes away. She spent 11 of them looking at Eli asleep on her lap, and one of them looking at the harbor through the rain-streaked window, the Calumet River dark and wide and indifferent, the red running lights of the northern warehouse still burning against the wet sky. She thought about what Tara Voss had said. Documentation, medical records, financial records, conversations. The architecture of a patient man who had spent 30 years understanding that the most durable weapons were not physical, not guns or men or fortified positions, but paper. Records. The kind of damage that accrues interest over time, that can reach into a future you haven't lived yet and compromise it before you arrive. Soren had known he might lose the terminal. He'd planned for it. He'd built a secondary position out of information instead of concrete, and he'd aimed it not at Damien, because Damien was armored against most things, but at Eli. At the legal and financial reality of a 6-year-old boy whose parentage had just become knowable to anyone with the right documents and the right motivation to use them. The car stopped at the terminal gate. One of Damien's men was at the gate, different from the one she'd seen at the safe house, new face, same quality of professional stillness. He looked at the driver. The driver said something short. The gate opened. She shifted Eli carefully. He stirred. Shh, she said. Still sleeping. I'm not sleeping, he mumbled, eyes still closed. I know, still resting. Okay, he said, and was immediately unconscious again. She moved him gently to the seat beside her, tucked her coat around him, and got out of the car into the rain. The inside of the warehouse had the aftermath quality of a place where something violent had recently happened and been cleaned up enough to function in, but not enough to erase. Overturned equipment, a section of the east wall that had taken damage, the smell of smoke and wet concrete, and something sharper underneath. The red running lights were the only illumination on the main floor. They made everything look like a photograph taken in the wrong era. Damien was standing near the center of the floor when she came through the interior door. Reyes was beside him. 2 other men she didn't know. And Victor Soren, sitting in a chair with his hands zip-tied in front of him and his white hair dark with rain and his face doing something she recognized as the face of a man who has lost the board and is waiting to see the terms. Damien turned when she came in. His expression moved through several things very fast. Relief. Something that was not quite anger but was adjacent to it. The look of a man who had told someone to stay put and was recalibrating his response to the fact that they hadn't. "I got a call," she said before he could speak. "Tara Voss." She watched his face change. "She works for him," Avery said. She looked at Soren. "She called from a number I didn't know, said Soren had documentation. Medical records, financial, recordings. She said if you burn the network, the documentation goes active." She kept her eyes on Soren. "She said the decision was mine to make, not yours." Soren looked at her with that intelligent, patient look. Even zip-tied and rain-soaked in a compromised position, he had the quality of a man conducting an assessment. "She is correct," Soren said. "The documentation is held in reserve by a third party. Automated release if I don't make contact within a specific window." "A dead man's switch," Damien said. "I prefer contingency planning." Soren's eyes moved to Avery. "Ms. Hale, I want you to understand that this is not personal. You were a variable. You became a more significant variable than I anticipated." "Don't explain yourself to her," Damien said. "I'm not explaining myself. I'm being honest with her, which is more than most people in this room have been." Soren looked at Avery with something that was against all reason, close to respect. "You came here yourself, in the middle of the night, with your son in the car." He tilted his head slightly. "What exactly did you think you were going to do?" She looked at him. She'd been asking herself the same question for 12 minutes in the car. What exactly was she going to do? She wasn't armed, she wasn't trained. She was a woman who ran a coffee shop and raised a child alone and had survived 12 years on the specific combination of stubbornness and financial desperation that didn't leave room for anything else. But she'd been sitting in a parked car with her son asleep on her lap, while a man she'd spent 12 years grieving fought through a shipping terminal in the rain for reasons that were now partly about her and partly about a boy who didn't know his own name yet in the context of all this, and she had not been able to stay in the car. She had not been capable of it. "I came to see his face," she said, "when he heard that his contingency didn't work." Soren looked at her. Something moved in his eyes. "The documentation," she said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. "Call Tara Voss, right now, in front of me. Tell her to release it." Soren's eyes narrowed. "Why would I?" "Because there's nothing in it that ends us," she said. "Medical records? Yes. Proof of Eli's parentage? Yes. Financial connections between Damien and operations that would be inconvenient to have public? Probably yes." She kept her voice even. She could feel Damien looking at her from across the room. "Release all of it, tonight, to whoever you were going to release it to." "Avery." Damien's voice was low, warning. She didn't look at him. "We know who Eli's father is," she said, still looking at Soren. "It's not a secret that destroys us. It's a fact that we're already living with. The financial records, whatever damage they do, Damien can answer for it or he can't, but that's a separate problem from tonight." She took a breath. "You built that contingency to be a threat. You aimed it at us like it was a weapon because you thought we were afraid of the truth coming out." She looked at Soren's face. "We're not. Because the only people that documentation can hurt are the ones who are hiding things, and we're done hiding things." The warehouse was quiet. Rain on the roof, the river outside. Soren looked at her for a long time, that patient, calculating intelligence, running its assessments. He was looking for the angle, the place where she was wrong, where the logic didn't hold, where the threat still had teeth. She watched him look for it and not find it. Because the thing about a weapon aimed at a secret is that it requires the secret to exist. And she had just, in a rain-soaked terminal on the Calumet River, decided that she was done keeping his secrets for him. Soren looked at Damien. Damien was looking at Avery with an expression she had no word for. Not the controlled devastation, not the stripped function. Something else. Something that didn't have armor. "The documentation releases," Soren said finally, "and you release me." That was the arrangement Tara communicated. "No," Damien said. Soren looked at him. "You release the documentation," Damien said, "because it no longer matters. And I decide what happens next. That's how tonight ends." He walked toward Soren slowly, hands loose at his sides, the walk of a man who is not performing threat because he doesn't need to. "Call Voss, release the files,
And then you're going to tell me every name on your internal list that I don't already have from Cole. Soren was quiet. Victor. Damien stopped in front of him. I trained under you for 4 years. I know exactly how you calculate. Right now, you're deciding whether there's a play left, and there isn't. The terminal is gone, the communications are down, Cole is burned, and the 3 men you had watching Avery's building are currently having a conversation with Reyes. He looked down at the older man with something that was not hatred and not love, but was the complicated wreckage of a relationship that had been, at its core, a long betrayal. There is no play. Tell Voss to release the files, give me the names, and this ends without anything worse happening. And if I don't, then I stop being careful, Damien said. A very long silence. Soren looked at his hands and the zip ties. He looked at the red running lights on the walls. He looked like, for the first time, exactly how old he was. 61 years old and wet and sitting in a chair in a building he thought was his and wasn't anymore. Phone, he said. Reyes brought him a phone. Soren made 2 calls. The first to Tara Voss, 3 words. Release the files.
The second call was longer, a list of names delivered in the flat professional tone of a man doing the last piece of work he would ever do in this particular capacity. Reyes recorded it. When it was done, Soren sat back in the chair and looked at nothing. Whatever he was, whatever he'd done, he had built a life around a structure of power and patience, and it was gone now. Avery watched his face, and she didn't feel triumph. She felt the particular exhausted sadness of watching any human being arrive at the end of a very long, wrong road. She turned and walked back toward the door. Outside, the rain was lighter. Still falling, but thinner now, the kind that didn't demand acknowledgement. She stood on the dock beside the warehouse and looked at the river. Damien came out behind her. He stood beside her, and they looked at the water together without speaking for a moment. The Calumet River at night was not beautiful. Industrial, dark, smelling of things that had been moving through it for 100 years. But it was real, and real was sufficient. The documentation is going to cause problems, he said. I know. The financial records in particular. There are people who will use them. I know. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she said, because you were never going to let it go. He had a leash on you, and you would have felt it forever, and eventually it would have made you make a decision that... She stopped. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I was tired of his secrets having power over things that are mine. Damien was quiet. What happens to him now, she said. He goes somewhere he can't reach anything. Safely, quietly. A pause. I'm not going to do anything worse than that. He's 61 years old, and he's finished, and that's enough. She nodded. The organization, he said. What I told him about dismantling it. I meant it. He looked at the river. Not all of it. There are parts that are just business, legitimate business, or close enough that it doesn't matter. But the parts that run on fear and on doing the kind of thing that was done to us, those are done. He exhaled. It's going to take time. It's going to be complicated. There are going to be people who fight it. That's a lot of hard work, she said. Yeah. For unclear reward. Some of the reward is fairly clear to me, he said. She looked at the river. I'm not... She stopped, started again. I can't do what you do. I can't live inside that. I have a son, and I have a cafe, and I have... She gestured vaguely at herself, at the specific accumulation of choices and circumstances that had made her this. This is what I have, and it's not nothing. I know it's not nothing. I'm not going to pretend 12 years didn't happen because we know the reason for them now. I'm not asking you to pretend anything, he said. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. The lighter rain came down. The river moved. Time, he said. That's all. Just time to be present. To learn who Eli is. To... He stopped and his jaw worked on something. I missed 6 years of him. I didn't know I was missing them, which is its own kind of grief, and I'd like to not miss more. She looked at him. He was wet and cut, and his hand was wrapped,
and he was standing on a dock on the Calumet River at midnight, having just dismantled 30 years of another man's architecture, and he looked exactly the way he'd looked at 20. Uncertain, under the competence, uncertain in the specific way of someone who knows exactly how to function in a crisis and has no idea how to function in an ordinary morning. "Start with coffee," she said. "Come in, drink it, tip appropriately but not obscenely." Something moved across his face. "Yeah? Don't make it into more than it is yet, just start there." He nodded, once. The nod of a man accepting terms he knows are fair. "Okay," he said. 3 months later, Chicago had one of those December mornings that occasionally came as a surprise, clear and cold and bright, in the particular way that made the lake look like hammered silver, and the city look like someone had cleaned it overnight. The kind of morning that made people who hated Chicago winters grudgingly admit that the city knew sometimes how to make the cold worth it. The new cafe opened on a Saturday. It was smaller than the old place, a narrow storefront on Riverview Street, 2 blocks from the Chicago River, with floor-to-ceiling windows on the front and exposed brick on the interior walls that Avery had spent 3 weekends cleaning and sealing herself because she'd gotten a quote from a contractor and laughed out loud at it. The sign above the door said "Compass" in clean sans serif letters. Donna had rolled her eyes at the name. Marcus had said it was corny. Avery had kept it anyway. By 9 o'clock, the line was out the door. Eli was behind the counter wearing an apron that was 3 sizes too large and dragging on the floor, and his job was officially to hand people napkins, and his unofficial job was to provide commentary on every customer who came through, which he did with the unfiltered specificity of a 6-year-old operating without social inhibition. "That man has a very big coat," he told Donna. "Many men do," Donna said. "It's like a sleeping bag." "Tell him he looks nice." Eli considered this. "It's a really nice sleeping bag," he told the man, who laughed and left a $5 tip. Donna looked at Avery. Avery looked at the ceiling. The morning rush built and broke and built again. Avery moved through it with the rhythm she'd built over years of early mornings and long shifts and the specific education of doing the same thing every day until you knew it in your body instead of your head. She pulled shots and called orders and wiped the counter and answered questions, and somewhere around 10:30 she looked up and Damien was there. He came in without the overcoat, without the flanking men. He was wearing a jacket and dark jeans, and he looked, in the winter morning light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, almost like an ordinary person stopping in for coffee on a Saturday. Almost. He still had the quality. She didn't think that was going to go away. The stillness, the way the room adjusted around him. Some things were built too deep to be renovated. He sat at the counter. Eli noticed him immediately. Eli noticed everything immediately. It was both his greatest quality and the primary source of Avery's exhaustion, and came around the counter in his enormous apron and stood in front of Damien with the evaluating expression of a child conducting an inspection. "You came back," Eli said. "I said I would," Damien said. Eli thought about this. "Mom says people say things." "She's right." "But you actually came." "Yeah." Another long evaluation. Avery watched from behind the espresso machine, her hands going through the familiar motions. Tamp, run, clear, while the rest of her attention was entirely on the counter. "Do you know how to make coffee?" Eli asked. "No," Damien said. "Mom's teaching me. I'm not very good yet." Eli looked philosophical about this. "She says it takes practice." "Most things do. Do you know how to do anything in a cafe?" Damien looked at Eli with that face, the face that had no armor, the one he'd been showing more often in the last 3 months, the one that appeared specifically in Eli's vicinity with a frequency that Avery had stopped pretending not to notice. "I'm a pretty good dishwasher," he said. Eli's eyebrows went up. "We have a lot of dishes." "I can handle it." Eli looked back at Avery, the look of a child checking with his primary authority figure before committing to a new arrangement. She met his eyes. She kept her face neutral and let him make his own assessment, because he was 6 and he was smart, and he deserved to make his own assessments about the people who came into his life, and she had decided some time ago that she was not going to manage this for him. Eli turned back to Damien. "Okay," he said, with the gravity of someone signing a contract.
You can start with the big cups. They're hard to get clean in the corners. I'll manage, Damien said. Eli nodded and went back to his napkin station, satisfied. Avery brought Damien his coffee, black, no ceremony, and put it on the counter in front of him and turned back to the machine. The cups are actually not that bad, she said. I figured. He's testing you. I know. He tests everyone. I plan to pass, Damien said. She heard it the way you hear something simple that has weight behind it. Not a declaration, not a speech, just a statement of intention from a person who had learned, at significant cost, the difference between saying and doing. She pulled another shot. The morning light came through the windows and hit the counter and the cups and the hands of the people sitting at the bar, and the cafe filled with the sounds that good cafes fill with. The machine, the voices, the particular percussion of cups on saucers and chairs on tile. She put her hand to the compass at her throat. A reflex. An old one. She let go of it. The 3 months since the terminal had not been simple. The documentation Soren released had done damage. Not catastrophic, not the kind that couldn't be navigated, but real. The kind that required lawyers and careful maneuvering and several conversations between Damien and people she never met in rooms she was never in. He had handled it. He had also, as promised, begun the methodical process of dismantling the parts of the organization built on fear. Quietly, unglamorously, the way you do structural work, piece by piece, making sure the load transfers correctly before you remove the support. There had been 2 men who pushed back hard. Damien had handled that too, in ways she chose not to ask the details of, because she understood that the line between the world she lived in and the world he was still partially inside was real, and respecting it was part of how they were going to make the space between them habitable. Sal Caruso had been arrested in early December on charges that had nothing to do with Damien and everything to do with a federal investigation that had been building for 2 years, and that Damien had, through a channel she didn't ask about, allowed to proceed unimpeded. He was facing 12 years. His lawyer was very good. It would probably be 8. Victor Soren was in a facility in rural Wisconsin, officially for health reasons, in the care of people who reported to Damien. He would not be making calls. He would not be building structures. He was, as Damien had said on the dock, finished, and that was enough. The leak in Damien's organization, the man besides Cole, had been found. A younger man, mid-level, who had been flipped not by ideology or money, but by fear, the most common reason for most betrayals. He was no longer in a position to betray anything. Cole himself had been moved to a situation that was not quite freedom and not quite imprisonment, something in the architecture between a man who had given everything he had and accepted the consequences and was living now in the specific quiet of someone who has discharged a debt and doesn't know what comes after that. Avery had no feeling about this she could name cleanly. She was working on it. What she had built in the 3 months since the terminal was this, an ordinary morning. Not a perfect one. The refrigeration unit in the new cafe was already making a sound she didn't like, and the second espresso machine had jammed twice during setup, and Marcus had gotten into a territorial dispute with the contractor over the electrical panel that she'd had to mediate, but ordinary, functional, hers. Damien had been in it, slowly, coffee in the mornings when he could, dinner twice at her kitchen table with Eli narrating the meal and asking questions that had no tactful answer, and that Damien answered with a directness that Eli responded to the way he responded to most things he found credible, by immediately asking 12 follow-up questions. He had come to Eli's school's winter performance. He had sat next to Avery in a folding chair in a gymnasium and watched Eli stand in the 3rd row of a children's choir and sing with the particular joyful inaccuracy of a 6-year-old who knows the song but not all the notes. And Damien had watched him with that unarmored face and said nothing, and that had been, against all reason, one of the most complete moments Avery had experienced in years. They had not discussed what they were. The word wasn't there yet. Maybe it would be eventually. Maybe it would be something that didn't have a name yet, something that the specific circumstances of their history required inventing. She was not in a hurry. She had learned, over 12 years of building a life out of what she had, rather than what she'd wanted, that the structure matters more than the label you put on it. She had also learned more recently that sometimes the structure you get is better than the one you planned. By 2 in the afternoon, the Saturday rush had thinned to the comfortable mid-afternoon pace, the cafe filled with people who were staying rather than moving through. Laptops, books, a couple in the window booth who had been there for 2 hours and were on their third coffees and showing no signs of resolving whatever they were working through. Eli had fallen asleep in the corner booth. He'd done it without announcement, the way children do. 1 minute conducting his napkin operations with full executive authority, the next horizontal on the bench with his apron bunched under his head and his backpack as a secondary pillow and his breathing gone slow and deep. The dog from Petra's apartment, which had come with them for the day as a trial run, was asleep under the booth. Damien was at the sink. He had in fact been washing dishes for the last hour, not as a gesture, practically, because they'd run through the clean cups faster than anticipated, and the machine was backed up, and he'd taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves and done it, with the particular quiet competence of someone who did not need tasks to mean something in order to do them well. Avery leaned against the counter and watched him for a moment. He was standing at the sink with his back to her and his sleeves rolled to the elbow and the afternoon light coming through the front windows reaching him at an angle that made the gray in his hair visible at the temples. The scar along his jaw. The wrap still on his left hand, lighter now, nearly healed. The particular set of his shoulders, not the tense stillness of a man in a room he was assessing, but something else, looser, the posture of someone who has, provisionally and with full awareness of the work involved, put something down. She thought about the night he'd walked into her cafe, the black convoy, the stolen air, the compass that she'd reached for without meaning to, the giveaway she'd hated herself for. She thought about how long she'd worn a promise around her neck and called it habit, and told herself it didn't mean anything. She had known, some part of her, from the first morning. She crossed the cafe. She stopped beside him at the sink. He looked over at her. She looked at his face, at all of it, the scar and the gray and the cut at his hairline that was just a white line now, at the eyes that were still the same color, the thing she'd hated, the thing she'd stopped hating. She reached over and picked up a dish towel. "You wash," she said. "I'll dry." He looked at her for a moment, then he turned back to the sink. "Okay," he said. Outside, the Chicago River caught the winter sun and threw it back at the city, and the light came through the Compass Cafe windows and lay across the floor in long, pale rectangles. And Eli slept in the corner booth, and the afternoon went on in the way that good afternoons go. Unhurried, unannounced, asking nothing except that you be present for it. The compass hung at Avery's throat, warm and still. She had stopped reaching for it. She didn't need to anymore.